Thanks, Lisa. Thanks so much. We are so very excited to be presenting this event right now. And we're thrilled that you're all with us today. We know how busy you are. We know how crazy this market is, and anything we can do to help you, we're thrilled to do it. Right now, I'm not going to delay in introducing to you our 2023 president of the Bucks County Association of Realtors, Douglas Krautheim, who is going to introduce our speaker today. Douglas, take it away.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Lisa Sturtevant. Has been involved in research on economic, demographic, and housing market issues for more than 20 years. She currently serves as the Chief Economist with Bright MLS, one of the largest multiple listing services in the country, serving over 100,000 members. Subscribers across 6 states and the District of Columbia. In her role, she leads research and forecast activities for Bright, serving as a thought leader on the housing market. Thank you very much for joining us today, Lisa. We look forward to your knowledge sharing.
Hey, Douglas, thank you so much. Thank you, Pamela and Lisa. Thank you, everyone here with the Bucks County Association of Realtors, for the chance to be with you today. As Douglas mentioned, I'm the Chief Economist with Bright MLS, your MLS, and part of my job is to provide as much information as I can to our realtor members so that we can all try and make a little bit more sense of what's going on in this crazy housing market. But I also do really, I'm going to share some information, but I really enjoy these opportunities to connect with you all, because you are the ones working every day on the ground with buyers and sellers. So you are really the boots on the ground, and I welcome questions, but I also welcome any comments you have on what you're seeing in your local market, any data or information you think we should be tracking to help you better understand local market conditions, and just anything you think would be helpful for me to know about the Bucks County real estate market. So I'm going to share my screen, and the slides will be made available, so you can feel free to use the slides if you find any of them helpful. So I want to start by sort of laying the groundwork, because I think we're all very much aware that after 2.5 years of a really frenzied housing market, there's definitely been a shift in the housing market. And there's a lot of uncertainty about where the market might be headed in 2023. I will say, if anybody tells you they know for sure what the housing market's going to look like this year, I would take it all with a grain of salt. I think there's a lot of uncertainty out there in the market, and I'm really interested in sort of, what are the things we should be paying attention to? What's the exact number of transactions we should expect, or the exact price growth we should expect this year, but what are the things we should be paying attention to? And I want to start a little bit about where we are in the overall economy, right? And that's really important, because the health of our local housing markets has an awful lot to do with how well the overall economy is doing. This chart is a measure of gross domestic product and how it's changing. Gross domestic product is just a measure of all the goods and services that are produced in the economy. You can see it fell dramatically back in the second quarter of 2020 when the pandemic hit. Boomed really in the third quarter as we rebounded from that downturn. In the most recent quarters, we've been seeing GDP grow by about 3% year over year. That's pretty healthy economic growth. In fact, that's pretty much the long-term average growth in the economy. And that is a good sign for us moving into 2023 with relatively strong economic conditions. What's been a drag on the economy, though, has been housing. I don't have to tell you all this, but the residential fixed investment part of the economy, which is just a long way of saying anything related to housing, whether from new construction to home sales to leasing activity, is all in this residential fixed investment part of the economy. It accounts for between 15, maybe 18% of the overall economy. And over the last 2 quarters, you can see that piece of the economy has really been shrinking. And this is as we've seen new construction begin to stall, as obviously as home sales activity slow down considerably. So as the housing market begins to pick back up, and I do think we're starting to see signs of it picking back up, housing is actually going to start to be contribute more to GDP, and we'll actually see the overall economy look even a little bit better. We've seen that the labor market has actually been surprisingly, I think some people would say, surprisingly resilient. This shows the unemployment rate across the country, as well as in Pennsylvania and then in the Philly metro area. You can see, of course, that unemployment spiked back during when the pandemic hit. We have now hit at the national level an unemployment rate that is lower than we've seen since 1969. Can you believe that? Unemployment is lower than it's been in more than 5 decades. And we can see that's a pretty common pattern in most regions, including in the Philadelphia region. So we have very tight labor market conditions. We have jobs being added still, despite some news of some high-profile layoffs. I'm sure you've heard the news about Amazon and about Facebook or Meta laying off employees, Dell. Those layoffs are really very highly concentrated in the technology sector, which sort of overhired during the pandemic. In general, though, employers are still hiring and the labor market is still doing really well. That's really important, of course, right? People don't buy homes when they are worried about their jobs. And while there is a lot of economic uncertainty out there, right now, the labor market is holding firm. And that is even in the face of these actions by the Federal Reserve over the last 12 months. We have seen inflation, which in this chart is the solid line. We've seen inflation really escalate, hitting over 9% at the end of the summer. In response to rising inflation, the Federal Reserve has raised that short-term federal funds rate to try and tackle inflation, to try and reduce demand by making it more expensive to borrow. And the risk, of course, is if the Federal Reserve makes it more expensive to borrow, then businesses might begin to lay folks off. Businesses might be less willing to invest in new employees, and we might see the economy go into a recession. But so far, we've actually seen the labor market stay pretty resilient, and we could, in fact, avoid a recession, even though there are still signs that the Federal Reserve is going to continue to raise this federal funds rate. They really want that inflation measure to come down even further. So while these rate increases haven't had a negative impact on the labor market, of course, we have seen higher rates reflected in long-term borrowing rates, including rates on the 30-year fixed rate mortgage, which is the dark line here. Rates hit below 3% during the sort of middle of the pandemic, and we've had rates climb really dramatically over the last 12 months. One thing that we have to keep in mind, and this is probably the opportunity for you as you work with buyers and sellers, if people have only been paying attention to the housing market for the last couple of years, there's some people who think that sub 3% 30-year fixed rate mortgage rates are normal, right? Are typical, where in fact 6% rates are more in line with where we've been more typically, historically. And while we're going to talk a little bit about how that impacts affordability, there's sort of this readjusting expectations about what the housing market looks like as we head into 2023. And I really think that's what 2023 is all about, is resetting expectations, kind of coming to terms with this new normal and kind of allowing the pendulum to swing back to where we are in more stable market conditions. I think there's a lot of forecasters out there who are saying that who were saying that the housing market was going to really decline significantly, but I just don't see in our local markets here in the Mid-Atlantic any sort of major risks of huge price declines. If you do have yourself not on mute, if you wouldn't mind muting, that would be super great. I have a hard time concentrating. It's a bad thing when you have a bunch of kids running around the house, but so what we did see in the second half of 2022, and this chart shows the number of home sales in Bucks County every month. And if you notice, the dark blue line is for 2019. The reddish line is for 2022. If you look back at the beginning of 2022, home sales last year were about online with where we were in 2021 and in 2021 when things were really hot. But home sales activity really did decline pretty significantly in the second half of the year as mortgage rates started to climb. And in January, we see that home sales are down across the bright MLS footprint, which runs from New Jersey all the way down to Central Virginia. We can see home sales in January are down 33% compared to where they were a year ago. In Bucks County, we're down about 40% compared to where we were a year ago. But if you look back on the chart, you can even see we are down below where we were in 2019. And so we really did see a big retraction on the buyer side as higher mortgage rates sidelined a bunch of buyers who found that they couldn't make the numbers work anymore. I also think that, and it's hard to show this in the data, that we saw a lot of people who were still interested in being in the market, but as rates peaked in November, Thanksgiving was on its way, Christmas and the winter holidays, and there's some people who just said, let's get through the end of the year and we'll get back in the market after the first of the year. And we're actually starting to see some of that return of buyer activity in January and February. And I do think we'll start to see that show up more in the data, but we really did hit more than a decade low in terms of the number of transactions. At the same time, though, home prices have continued to rise. So this shows the median sales price in Bucks County in 1 month compared to the same month a year earlier. And you can see in the middle of the chart when we were in 2020 and 2021, home prices were rising at a double-digit pace, prices up 10, 15, even 20% year over year. And we know that type of double-digit price growth was really unsustainable. And so in recent months, you can see the chart goes through January 2023, prices are still rising. It's just the pace of price appreciation has slowed. Even with that slowdown in price growth, and even if we do see prices come down a little bit because of mortgage rates rising, the county's median sales price is still 50% higher than it was 4 years ago. And I think that's an important thing to remember as you're working with prospective buyers potentially who may say, I'm really worried about buying now because I think, I think prices are going to really fall and I might be buying at the peak. But the fact of the matter is when you look at prices over the longer term, 4, 5, 7 years, home prices have been steadily increasing. And if someone's interested in purchasing a home, to live in as their primary residence, there doesn't seem to be any indication that this is a challenging time to buy in terms of prices. The same thing with, talking with sellers, and they have seen tremendous amounts of equity in their home. And even if prices do come down a bit, home values are still going to be much higher than they were compared to before the pandemic, for sure. Prices have come down from their 2022 peaks. You can see the dark blue line shows the median sales price in Bucks County compared to the peak price, which was back in June of 2022. And then the lighter blue line is Philly, the metro area. You know what, but one thing I'll say, and this is one of the things where I think we have a chance to help dispel some myths and be a resource to our clients and to our colleagues and even to our community. We've been hearing a lot about home prices falling. And oftentimes what these media reports are prices are falling from peak levels. And as you can see here, prices have fallen from their peak levels. In fact, in Bucks County, you can see that, home prices are about 10% lower than they were back in the summer. But let me fill you in on a little secret that you probably already know. Home prices always fall in the second half of the year. We always have this seasonal decline in home prices. And so while we're seeing a little bit of a steeper drop off in 2022 than we would have in prior years, what we're seeing is a return to more seasonality in the housing market, that seasonality that we kind of lost during the pandemic when it was all frenzy all the time. So I would just advise you, as you're hearing reports or seeing articles about prices falling, just take a deeper dive into what they're talking about. And do they mean prices are down compared to a year ago, or do they mean that prices are down from their peak levels? And we'll probably see prices come down even a little bit more from peak, but again, still be up compared to where we were a year ago, and certainly where we were before the pandemic. One reason why, and I've looked at this a lot of different ways to say, should we expect home prices to fall? And I can't see it. Inventory is the primary reason why we're seeing upward pressure on prices. Inventory is still very low. Now, the number of active listings in Bucks County, for example, is up 40% compared to where we were last year at this time. But we're still about half of the inventory that there was on the market in 2019. And so as we see these numbers year over year, inventory growing, it's not because we're getting a surge of new listings coming onto the market, but rather because of the slowdown in new purchase contract activity, we're seeing homes stay on the market a little bit longer. So they're sort of clocking in that active listings count, and it's showing up as pretty significant year over year increases in supply. But long term, we're still at very low inventory. And I expect that this low inventory environment, we're going to be in that for quite some time as existing homeowners, frankly, many of whom refinance to sub 3% mortgages, are not interested in selling their home right now because they don't want to move from a very low mortgage rate into a 6 or 6.5% rate. And so there are other people who may be interested in listing their home, and they're just waiting to see if demand truly has bounced back. But buyers are still going to find inventory very tight and the market very competitive. You can see that in that new listings data. So this chart shows the number of new listings coming on to the market in Bucks County in a given month compared to a month or a year earlier. So you can see really, since the middle of 2021, all of these bars are negative, meaning we have had fewer new listings coming onto the market this year, or now, than we have in prior years. There's a little weird phenomenon going on. You can see that big spike in April of 2021. That's because there were no new listings in April of 2020. Pretty much when the pandemic hit. And so this just reflects this huge uptick from the pandemic days. But new listings are down compared to a year ago across the Bright footprint within the Philadelphia region and even in Bucks County. But these year over year declines are less than they have been. And what I mean by that is, there is some evidence that sellers who may have been on the fence about listing their property for sale, we are starting to see some evidence of an uptick in new listings as both buyers and sellers really kind of begin to accept this new normal in the housing market. But despite some shifts and a little bit of uptick in new listing activity from December to January, it's still really, really tough out there in terms of inventory. We are starting to see buyers and sellers both adjusting their expectations. And again, this is where your role as an agent and a broker and working with buyers and sellers have the opportunity to help them adjust to this new normal. And the new normal really is the same as the old normal in some ways. The median days on market in Bucks County, dipped really, really low down to around 6, meaning half of all homes were under contract in less than 6 days back in spring of 2022. The median days on market in the county has increased now to around 15. That's still pretty fast. I mean, it's a week slower than a year ago, but by historic measures, and if you look back, the chart goes back to 2019, when homes would take 20, 25, 30, 40 days typically to go under contract. So homes are still moving pretty quickly, particularly when sellers are pricing their homes appropriately to reflect the current market. We saw during the pandemic that there were multiple offers, lots of competition in the market, offers over list. This chart shows the average sold to list price ratio, right? So this is on average back in 2021, 2022, homes were selling for more than sellers were asking, by 2 to 4% more on average. And we can see since the end of 2022 and as we head into 2023, that average sold to list price ratio has begun to drop, which means sellers are listing their home, buyers are coming to the table to negotiate, and then the final sold price is actually coming in below list price. And I think this is one of those things to remind our folks we work with, is that, that's typically how it works, right? I mean, we are still seeing multiple offer scenarios in many local markets, but buyers have more leverage than they did in the height of the pandemic. And buyers are going to negotiate on price, and they're going to ask for things like home inspections and appraisals and maybe even help with closing costs. And that is kind of reflective of this resetting of the housing market. The closing costs or the seller concession issue is actually sort of interesting. Back last year and in 2021, less than 20% of sales had some type of seller concession as part of the transaction. Typically, more than half of home sales across the Bright MLS footprint have a seller concession, whether that's help with closing costs or help with repairs. And you can see that line is starting to tick up. And as I mentioned, sellers should expect that buyers are going to come and ask for and are going to negotiate and ask for these things. I think that even when inventory is low, and even as it still does remain a seller's market in most places, the sort of balance of power is going to, tip a little bit more favorably to buyers because there are so many fewer buyers in the market right now, that sellers should expect buyers to come to negotiate. So we track data on a monthly basis in our monthly home sales reports. We also keep track of what's going on a weekly basis as well, and we publish weekly stats on housing market activity at the state level. So this is for the area of Pennsylvania covered by Bright, which includes not only the Philadelphia metro, but also central Pennsylvania. And so when you look at this chart, this is weekly data, and the gray line is 2019, and you can see 2020, 21, and 22 are all there. And then the dark orange line is where we are here in 2023. So this chart shows the number of new purchase contracts, right? The number of pending sales where buyers have made an offer. And as you can see in 2023 at the start of the year, we are way below where we were last year, but we are even below where we were in 2019. And the big dip there, of course, is the pandemic in 2020. So ignoring that, you can see that we are still below where we would be in a typical housing market, but we are starting to see maybe some signs of buyers returning. The number of showings, that is buyers that are requesting to go tour homes, has been on the rise for the last few weeks. Mortgage rates have dipped down a little bit in January, and we think that brought some buyers back into the market. And we expect that as we head into spring, we will see more buyers returning to the market. It's interesting, we're also starting to see sellers return to the market. As you can see, the number of weekly new listings is beginning to rise, reflecting that sort of seasonal run up to the spring market. And so, while home sales activity has been slow, while frankly, buyers and sellers both might have been sort of taking a breath and sitting it out for a few months, and while realtors have maybe had a chance to catch your breath as well, I do expect that it's going to be a pretty robust spring market, despite the fact that interest rates will stay probably in the 6.5% range. There's still going to be enough buyer demand out there, and inventory is still going to be relatively low to encourage price appreciation in the Bucks County market. One, measure that Bright puts out along with our partners at T3 is called the Bright T3 Home Demand Index. So if you haven't checked this out, the link for it will be at the final slide here. But this is a way to look at what's going on in the housing market, kind of more in a forward-looking way. it takes data, this index uses data on showings as well as data on agent and public views of homes. Basically all that stuff that happens before, right, an offer is made, before that new purchase contract data come out. And it allows us to have a little bit of a preview of where the housing market might be headed and how markets compare. So on the left, you can see is the Philadelphia metro area, and the blue indicates markets where, frankly, conditions are limited with slow sort of pre-sales activity. You can click into Bucks County and you can see more details at the zip code level. And if you notice, there are some neighborhoods as defined by zip codes where this pre-sales activity is measured by showings and views of properties is actually indicating really high buyer traffic. And so this can be helpful as you're working with a seller who's like saying, well, I'm not sure if there's going to be a lot of interest in my home. If they're in one of these zip codes shaded in red, you can say, well, look, compared to some other parts of the county, this is actually where we're seeing a lot of buyer activity. Conversely, if you're sort of working with a buyer who's like, how aggressive should I be in my offers? You can say, well, this is a market where there's, seems to be a little bit hotter than in some other parts of the county, and you might want to be, thoughtful about the kind of offer you put in. So I think this is the kind of data that we're using to try and be a little bit more forward-looking, because it's really hard to predict where the housing market is headed in the best of times. And this is a very unusual time, and that makes it even harder to look ahead. The one thing I want to make sure that I say is, and you might be talking with folks who are worried about another major housing market downturn, frankly, because, it was 15 years ago, not that long ago. People still remember the last housing market collapse, the great financial crisis. But 2023 is not 2008. There are many ways in which the environment we're in now is just very different from where we were back 15, 16 years ago. Most importantly, there's just very low inventory, less than a month's supply in many local markets. By contrast, back in 2008, builders were still building right up until the market fell off the cliff. They've learned a lot, and we saw builders really pull back during the fall. So new construction is really limited. There's virtually no subprime lending in the market, and that was a major contributor to the run-up in home prices last time, and the reason why we saw prices fall so quickly in 2008. The foreclosure rate is very, very low. And as you know, if you were working in the market back in 05, 6, 7, 8, and 9, foreclosures sort of flooded many local markets. You might hear reports that the foreclosure rate has doubled in recent months, and that may be true. It turns out it's doubled from basically zero, and we are still at an overall foreclosure rate that is lower than the long-term average. There will always be foreclosures in the market, but there's no reason to think that our market is going to see a flood of foreclosures that will bring down home prices. Our labor market, as I mentioned, is pretty resilient compared to back in 2008. And then while prices have been rising at double-digit rates, I mean, we had one year back in 2008 or back in 2006 where home prices were up 50% in 1 year. So just much different pace of home price appreciation. And I think there are reasons to be a little bit upbeat about where the market's headed in terms of supporting strong demand. And some of these are things that, frankly, we don't hear a lot about. We hear a lot about mortgage rates. We hear a lot about inflation. But the fact of the matter is there are some very favorable demographic fundamentals out there, very strong economic conditions that will support strong housing market demand this year. And frankly, there's a lot of psychology going on. Look, we talk about how buying a home is this big financial decision, and it certainly is. There's a lot of that goes into the numbers, but buying and selling a home is definitely also an emotional and a psychological sort of decision. And there's a lot of evidence that people are coming to terms with new market conditions. There are risks in the market. related to affordability, related to very low inventory, and then also growing inequality in the housing market. You know, we've seen that the housing market has continued to move forward, even as interest rates have risen to, above 7% back in November, because we have a lot of existing homeowners, frankly, who have just accrued record levels of housing equity over the last few years. And there's many repeat buyers who are able to kind of roll that equity right into the purchase of their next home, in essence, sort of buying down, this higher mortgage rate. Nobody's excited about having to pay a higher rate, but because there's so much equity in people's homes, they're able to still make that move. First-time home buyers, on the other hand, are in a much more challenging situation. They have been spending the last 2.5 years, 3 years competing with cash buyers and with repeat buyers. Home prices have gone up at the same time. Rates are higher. And for first-time home buyers, it is going to be a difficult 2023 because I don't anticipate that prices are going to come down in any meaningful way. And there's still going to be competition out there in the market. I'm just going to wrap up here with a few slides that sort of put some numbers around, where the housing market might be headed. If you do have questions, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat, or we can, and I will obviously, we can chat after, we can discuss after I pull the presentation down. But if we look ahead to 2023, Bright, we do a forecast, and we put the forecast out in November. So I think I still stand by these numbers, but things are changing so rapidly. Sometimes we have to kind of, revisit these numbers. But if you look at the 2023 column there, you can see that these forecasts are for overall U.S. home sales to be at about 4.865 million home sales in 2023. That is actually the lowest annual number of home sales since 2014. And you're like, well, Lisa, you just told me things looked good. Why are we expecting such a slow market? Well, there's really two main reasons. Look at back in 2021, where there were over 6.1 million home sales. So that was way more than we usually would have. And so the pendulum has to come back the other way before we begin to settle into a more typical number of about 5 million home sales nationally each year. The other reason, though, I do think inventory is a constraint. And we were talking about that for the last few years, but there's going to be a limited number of transactions because buyers are still going to find a limited number of options out there as a lot of that inventory is locked down, as folks are sitting on really low mortgage rates, and then as new construction takes some time to ramp back up. In our footprint, we're expecting, if you look at the last column, it shows, home sales in 2023 compared to where we were in 2022. And you can see across the board, we're going to be down a little bit compared to where we were a year ago. And I expect that is part of this resetting as we move into a more normal housing market. When you look at home prices, look, I have tried to look every which way but Sunday at this to see if there's a reason we should expect home prices in our region to fall year over year. And I just can't see where home prices have room to fall since inventory is just so low. I do expect we'll see pretty stable prices. The forecasts, for example, in the Philadelphia metro area for home prices to be up just 1% year over year. And then nationally sort of pretty much flat. There'll be a lot of fluctuation, and there are some markets that are at, greater risk of home prices falling. This shows sort of a map of the Bright footprint. You can see you have some, Somerset, New Jersey up in the top, and then you can see we go all the way down to Central Virginia, down, sort of Page County, Madison County. There are places across the Bright footprint where, there was significant demand during the pandemic, where prices were run up by, people moving in from higher cost metro areas, places that were second home communities, mountain communities, coastal communities, where we're starting to see inventory, really rise quickly as people who might have purchased second homes during the pandemic are beginning to we're starting to see some of those be kind of put back on the market. So the reds are some of those counties where I expect there's a greater risk for prices to fall year over year. Sort of, you can see some of the big ones here. Dorchester County, Maryland, Sussex County, Delaware. If you look at Sussex County, Delaware, for example, you can see that's down, on the beach. We saw a lot of second home purchases. But if you look at the Philadelphia metro area and even in our Baltimore and DC metro areas, in general, in Bucks County, you can see relatively low risk of price falling year over year because of those strong demographic fundamentals, the resilient local economy, and the fact that inventory is going to stay pretty low. And so what does all that mean, right? What does all this mean for buyers, for example, who are in the market? I think that buyers should expect to see rates in the 6 to 6.5% range. We know the Federal Reserve is going to continue to raise the short-term federal funds rate. So interest rates, mortgage rates will bump around a little bit. I don't expect that we're going to see rates back up to 7%, but I also don't expect we're going to see mortgage rates fall much, if at all, below 6% for the next 6 months or so. If you're working with a buyer who thinks they're going to wait for rates to fall, I think it's possible. But I also think that if, people always ask me, is it a good time to buy? And, I always think, it's such an individual choice. If this is the right time, of course, for your individual buyer or family to make a home purchase, I don't see any reason why rates will be any lower next month or the month afterwards. And so what is going to be important, though, is now more than ever for buyers to really shop their rates and their terms. There's a lot of variability across lenders in the types of rates you can get. So it's definitely need to make sure you're getting multiple kind of, terms and rates from different lenders. Buyers will have more leverage on price, right? So buyers shouldn't be afraid to ask for, all of those home inspections and appraisals and sort of even making sure that they're bringing an offer that reflects current market conditions. There might be some they might be seeing more competition from cash buyers. In January, actually, across the Bright footprint, we saw the highest share of cash buyers in the market that we've seen in the last couple of years. As mortgage rates move higher, people who are paying cash, don't have the same restrictions that buyers who are financing do. So that we might see more cash buyers in the market, and inventory is still going to be very low. So buyers need to be prepared to make an offer with their financing in place. They don't have to necessarily, they can take a little bit more time than they have been over the last couple of years, but still need to have all their ducks in a row. On the seller side, I do think some sellers have, been sort of wondering if there are buyers out there, and I think we should expect an uptick in buyer traffic. Pricing is going to be critically important. And again, this is where the value of a local realtor is more valuable, more evident, pardon me, than ever before. When homes are priced appropriately, we're still finding in all markets across the Mid-Atlantic that they're still selling relatively quickly. But, sellers need to take time to prep their home, and sort of get it and ready to sell, and to be prepared for negotiations, and even to be expect maybe for buyers to, ask for closing cost assistance in order to close the deal. I think this is a really important time for you all and all of us who work in the real estate sort of industry to help re-educate, folks about what a typical housing market looks like. This is particularly important for buyers and sellers who may have only been in the market the last couple of years. It may also be important for some agents that who maybe just started in the business last year or the year before, to help them understand that what we have been through was just an unusual market and is not at all typical. Being a resource on local market conditions, I think, is more important than ever. And if we have resources at Bright and that we can provide to you directly or through your local association to help you really be the expert on your local market, because the news we're going to get about the housing market, when there's news about the national housing market, which, as we all know, doesn't really exist, but, may not it likely won't be meaningful for someone who is looking to make their home in Bucks County. We don't have the wild swings like a Los Angeles or a Miami or a Phoenix housing market. And sometimes that's what gets a lot of the attention in media stories about the housing market. So you should really be, the local resource for housing market conditions, and just to really help dispel any myths that may be concerning folks out there, and to demonstrate your value. Over the last couple of years, with things moving so quickly, in some ways it's been a really reactive time, and now realtors have a chance to really demonstrate how much value they bring to buyers and sellers. As I'm closing up here, I just want to make sure that you are aware of the resources that your MLS has for you in terms of housing market reports on a monthly basis and a weekly basis. We try and get information out in ways that people like to receive it. If you like to read reports, we've got you covered. If you like infographics or videos, you can also find those resources. Feel free to use them in your social media, on your website, on your listing presentations, however it is helpful to you. We have a lot of short blogs on different topics that are relevant to kind of the current market. And then every month on the third Thursday of the month, I do a webinar that covers what's going on in the Mid-Atlantic housing market, takes a look ahead at some of the issues we should be watching. And then lastly, I had shown you some those maps that demonstrate some of that pre-sales activity, that home demand index, and you can find your local market's home demand index on homedemandindex.com. You can also find it within Matrix when you're looking at individual listing data. But with that said, I want to thank you again, Pamela, Douglas, Lisa, for the opportunity to be with the Bucks County Association of Realtors. I am always available for comments or questions after the fact. After we meet, you always can reach out. If there are questions now, I'm happy to go ahead and unmute yourself, and comments or questions are welcome. And thank you again for the chance to be with you.
Dr. Sturtevant, I can't thank you enough. This has been invaluable for our members, and Bright has been a terrific resource to us. We do, as an association, publish the reports that you're so great at getting to us. So I encourage all of our members to keep an eye on your newsletter, our website. We push that material and those resources out at every turn, but I appreciate it. We are going to be sending the resources that you've listed out to everyone after the fact, but I don't see anything in the chat. Is there anyone who has a question for Dr. Sturtevant?
I have a question.
Yeah, Joe.
So, Lisa, you were saying that, some of the pushback you might receive from buyers is that they're maybe waiting for rates to drop. Best case scenario, if they drop to 5%, if that's a possibility, how could we explain to them, if they wanted to wait for that to happen, what is the difference in their monthly, what they would see difference if they waited from 6.5% to 5%? Is there like a quick way to kind of explain that?
Yeah, there should be, right? Don't you think, Joe? There should be a quick way to explain that.
Right.
I have a little spreadsheet where I do that math out, and I know that when we saw rates go from like 6 to 6.5, we were looking at like a $200 increase in the monthly payment. So you might be able to reverse that around.
Okay.
I think. But you make me think, it makes me think that would be a worthwhile sort of little widget for us to sort of put together, where you can kind of sit with someone and say, well, look, here's what, just like back of the envelope, right?
Right.
Obviously everybody's situation will be different. The other thing I would, talk with them about, and again, people need to make the decision what's based on right for their financial situations. But even if they thought rates might come down a 0.5 percentage point over the next couple of months, we're going to see prices continue to go up. It's not like prices are going to stay fixed, right? So you have to offset that waiting with the fact that home prices may continue to rise, particularly as we head into summer when we know prices tend to rise anyway. That's a long way to answer the question by saying
I didn't think about it from that angle as well, as even if it drops a 0.5%, right, it's going to bring a lot more people back into the market, or it may bring more. Okay, so all right, that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, that's right. And like I said, if there's a lot of people out there trying to make predictions about where mortgage rates are headed, and it's just, the problem is like the old rules don't apply anymore. We're just in such an uncharted territory in terms of this recovery from the pandemic that it's really hard to make predictions. But like I said, we're sort of thinking 6.5% is probably going to be what we're going to see here over the next few months.
All right, and then also, I'm sorry, one last question. So, we were saying that the average sold to lists now is at like 97-ish%. Is that, do we predict that's probably going to be the case for the rest of the year, or?
Yeah, I think so. That's kind of where we've been historically. And I think it's going to fluctuate around, particularly as sellers get a little bit better at coming in at a more kind of reflecting kind of where we are now. But what we've seen in the past is that that differential between list price and sold price has been around 3%. I can't see any reason why that wouldn't be kind of the norm going forward. There's going to be still some cases of multiple offers though, and there's still going to be properties that sell for over asking price for sure. I think it's just going to be that level, that intensity of competition is going to ease off to more sort of typical conditions.
Awesome, thank you.
Great. Dr. Sturtevant, we have a question in the chat. Very interested in the home index data that helps with proactively gauging interest. Will that link be included in the follow-up information?
Yep, it's for sure. And it's definitely, it'll be in the PowerPoint slides, which you'll have available to you. And then just, because we're in the magic of Zoom, I'm going to put it in the chat as we speak here. If you want to copy it and paste it, you can do that as well. If you are on the Home Demand Index website and you any questions at all, you can always reach out to me, and Jennifer is also on the call. I'm putting my email address in the chat as well.
Thank you so very much. This has been invaluable, and I greatly appreciate your approachability, Dr. Sturtevant. Thank you so much for everything.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time.
Sure. We will be publishing this recording to the membership, and with all of the attached documentation and reports and such. So keep an eye on it and spread the word. Spread the word that we have these Zoom power hours on a variety of intriguing subjects. And again, thank you to Bright MLS for their resources and their willingness to give these resources to us. Thank you so much. So I guess I'll say goodbye to everyone. Thanks for coming, and keep your eyes out for future programming. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks all.